Over the next two sections, we're going to be talking about composition and lighting in interior design. One thing you need to know is you may know how to do it in 3D or you may not, but one thing you need to know is real life work. So I have a quick video here, and it's a great video. It's how to shoot and edit professional interior photography by Becky and Chris YouTube channel. And it just goes over the fundamentals of an actual real life environment and how they work. I really suggest you watch this because it gives you a bit of insight before you then try and mimic it in 3D. So when you're researching, which you definitely should be doing, my research, I found these shots which I particularly liked. And the one I like the most is probably this one, but I'm going to go slightly at an angle and aim for a corner of a room. I'm not going to go for that straight on view. So let's jump into 3ds Max and let's try and create this view with the assets I've made beforehand. So this is the scene I prepared beforehand. It's basic enough. It's a 1-bedroom apartment. So going back to that shot we had, we want to get this view so that we need to go near the table, this size. If I double click here, you'll see up here we have the 692 by 1024. I'm going to use exactly that. So if I go into my settings and go into my render settings, that's what I'm going to set straight away. And if I go custom, here I have already set in 692 1004. So if I was to go in here and hit Shift F, you're going to see what we have. We're going to go into cameras here, scroll down to V-Ray and hit V-Ray physical camera. We're going to click where we want the camera to start. So I want it near the table, and we're going to click and drag to where I want it to point. The only thing now we need to worry about when using this camera is we want to set the sensor and lens. So the film gate we're going to keep at 36. That's a default film. It won't change really. It depends what you're mimicking. If you want to mimic a mobile phone and bring it down to probably like 3.6 or even lower. But at the moment we're mimicking like a DSLR camera, and we will be doing that for most of our shots. So 36 won't change, so you can lock that in. The only thing then we have to worry about is the focal length. In interiors, for this close-up shot I want to do, you want to go somewhere between a 36 and a 50mm lens. So I'm going to go for a 50mm, and if I go into my camera view now, you see we're a bit too low, so I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to hit F3 to bring in this. You're going to see a few things. We're very close. So what I might do is I'll go into the top view and start moving and adjusting this until I'm happy. So let's move this here, and we'll hit camera here, hit F3, stay in our top view, and let's start moving it until we like it. So we're going in, we're a bit low down. So what I might do is I go in my front view and we're just moving this camera up and down. I want to make sure that we're moving this up and down the same axis. I don't want to be in the target and the camera, so move it up, and we have something along this line. I don't mind this table being clipped out, but I don't like it just the edge, so I'm going to move it over, and we're happy out with that. Doesn't want to work, so something along those lines. But we're going to use something else to help us get our composition right. So if I select the camera, just the camera, go into our modify panel. Well, first thing we want to do is we want to click automatic vertical tilt. So if we click that, that'll keep our verticals vertical and our horizontals horizontal. And that's exactly what you want in interior design. You don't want awkward angles. So the next thing we want to do is we want to go into our our proportion guides. And I like using the golden spiral. It gives us a nice different type of look. You can use like the golden grid and you get that type of stuff, but it gets a bit, I don't like it as much. What I'm going to do here now, I'm going to use this curve to draw the eye up this way, around, and then finish up here. But we're kind of finishing a bit off. So I'm going to start moving this shot until it looks a bit better, something like this. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I want. So we have the camera going up like this, bringing our eye all the way around, and then we go in here. I don't like that we're seeing the top corner of this, so I'm going to make sure our camera is straight first of all. It is, okay. And I'm going to push this down just ever so slightly. And in this shot, if I go back to my reference, I want this slightly out of focus and things over here in focus. So this will be out of focus, this will be in focus. And that's pretty much our composition put together. So now we're moving on to lighting. So the very first thing you want to do in our lighting is remove anything distracting like materials. So we want to have one basic material on it. And the way to do that is we go to global switches in V-Ray settings, and we want to make sure this is checked. We then want to click here and add in your V-Ray material. I type it in, double click, and it's in. Then you also want to exclude anything you want light to come through. So we have our daylight outside, we want it to go through the windows. So I have exclude, and I've excluded glass by adding in here and going, bring it in here and make sure this is set to exclude. And that's that. Now, the way we're going to light our scene, we're going to use a high dynamic range image, and I'm going to use Chaos's Cosmos here to import. So I'm going to select this one and I'm going to hit import. Now, what has it done? Once I close this, and I hide anything else, we have this light and it's a dome light, and it's after putting in an image down here. So if I want to show you that image, we can click here and we can click and drag this in here, click instance, and we have this light. It looks very bright. If I bring this down just so you can see a bit better, I'll put this like 0.1 and you can see what that's what it looks like. I'm going to put this back to 1. But now understanding the dome light. So if I hit render on our scene, if I bring everything back and I hit render on our scene, you'll see it's quite dark at the moment, and that's fine. We're just starting out. But how do you know the direction of the HDRI? Well, you could look at it in the viewport and stuff like that, but there's a much easier way. If you zoom in here onto this light, you'll see there's a little direction button. So let me hide the other assets. Keep the sun open. And if I start rotating this, you'll notice nothing happens. So why is that? Well, there's an old feature which you rotated in the map settings, but now we can just simply click this lock texture to icon. Now, if I start rotating, you can see our HDRI moves with it. It's perfect. But there's an easier way now. See this little point sticking out? Well, that's the direction of the sun. So the sun's over here pointing this way. So now I know the sun's pointing that way. I can bring everything back and I can say, okay, so it's pointing that way. I want it to point through the windows. So let's rotate it this way and let's have it point here. So we have it's a little bit better. So there's one thing that people do quite recently, a feature that came in, which is camera auto exposure and white balance. So if I click refresh here, we have it quite dark, and you can easily just click auto exposure and auto white balance, and then you get a pretty quick result. I don't like doing this, and I don't think people should, especially when they're beginners, because you're letting something else take control without you fully understanding what's going on, and it also limits your camera settings. And you're trying to mimic real life, and if you have a real life DSLR, people never set it on automatic for everything. You need manual control to get what you want out of it. So let me explain that further by going into the camera settings. If I now hit stop and I hit transfer to selected cameras, sure enough, now I can uncheck these and I have something close, which I don't mind. You can do that and then alter it, but I don't like doing that because I like to make the settings myself so I understand the scene better. So let's jump into the camera and show you exactly what I mean by that. So now we have manual control over our camera. So that means we can take more artistic control over it and get exactly what we want. So in the image that we were looking at earlier, this is out of focus and this is in focus. So that means we need to check depth of field down here, and then we need to play with our F number. If I look at a cheat sheet right here, you'll see that a wide aperture, opening up, letting lots of light in, gives us a shallow depth of field, and that's what we want. But then we're gonna have to play with the shutter speed. So if I then lower this down, say to 2.8, you're going to see stuff close to us is now out of focus. And that's what I want. And you might be saying to yourself, well, you can do this in post-production. I like to do it inside Vray when I can. Sometimes I won't, because it just gives us a bit more artistic control and it gives a better result, I feel. But you can do it in post-production as well using Z-Depth. Now that we're happy with that, we know these two are locked in. So we have 100 and we have 2.8. So we only need to worry about shutter speed. And what is shutter speed? Well, 200 there is 200 of a second. So if I was to put this to 1, that means that the lens is open, the shutter is open for 1 second, letting in light for 1 second, which is way too much. So I'm going to go somewhere between, let's say, a 50th of a second. And we're getting there. It's a bit too overexposed here, so let's bring it up to 75. And yeah, I like that. We're getting a bit too much exposure. Maybe go to 85 and see what that's like. It's okay for your shots to be overexposed in some areas. Like, that's an artistic approach. So you can have your windows be overexposed and have everything else lit inside. The idea that nothing in your shot can be overexposed isn't true. If it's something that you like and it looks good for the image, then keep it. It can be overexposed. It's just bad if your entire image is overexposed. Now, the one thing missing in our render is the ground plane. So at the moment the light is going through and it's not hitting anything. So we need something to hit the surface and bounce back in. This is a photography trick they use on a small scale even. They use white sheets to bounce light into people's faces to light them underneath for portraits. So to do that, we're just going to create a plane and we're just going to draw it at the bottom. So let's drag it out here, grab that plane, and we're going to just put on a normal V-Ray material. So we have a V-Ray material attached to that now. And that light is now bouncing up. Now I've saved out the old one, and if I go back to the old shot and I add this in, I'm going to now hit stop and I'm going to compare both the images. So you can see the one on the left is the one we've now added a sheet to allow light to bounce in, and the one on the right is no surface. So you can see that difference straight away. It really lights up the top sections and adds it a bit of softer light. But just by adding that single ground plane, we're now bouncing light up and creating much better lighting. So it's a very cheap and quick trick, you could say, but it's mimicking real life where you have light bouncing and coming back into the house. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add 2 layers here, which is the white balance and the exposure. Those are the only 2 I add in here in terms of lighting, because the other things I like to do in post in Photoshop, you can do it in here, but these are the only 2 I like to adjust. Now, you might be asking yourself, why add exposure and white balance when you went through all the effort of setting up the camera? Well, it's just to give you an extra level of control. You want to have your camera as close as possible, and then these layers just give you that added control. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust exposure. Now, I've seen some people do this strange thing. I don't know where this habit picked up. Maybe some tutorials are picking it, and they put this highlight burn all the way down. I don't understand that. It's like, you shouldn't do that because that's destructive, and it's okay to have overexposure, like I said earlier. So keep that in there. You can adjust it a bit, but do not turn it down to 0, please. That's not how it works. Like, you're mimicking real life by putting this all the way down. You're kind of cheating, and I guess it's okay to cheat sometimes, but I personally don't think it's a good idea to turn this down to 0. I'm going to turn it down maybe a tiny bit, but I like the overexposure. It adds life to the image. Now, in terms of the exposure itself, we can just start adjusting this slightly. See, it's a bit too much and a bit too little. So I'm very close. I need to add in just a small bit, or honestly a tiny bit. I'm happy with the exposure. So that's all I need to do. You can add in contrast, which is good, which I think adds in a good bit. Just a small bit. I'm not sure if you could be able to see it on the compression on YouTube, but it's only subtle. So most of the things I'm going to do are subtle. Now, the next thing is the white balance. And this is personal preference again. It's like, do you want it to be a warm look or do you want it to be a nice cold look? If you want it cold, you can just drag this down this way. The lower the temperature, the cooler it looks, or else you can bring it higher. I'm going to make it not too much higher, just a bit. It's always nicer, a living room, you want it a bit warm. So I always find about 8,000 is a good number. It doesn't go too much, but again, we can change this in post. We can do all these things. We're just trying to get as close as possible in here. And that's pretty much done for the lighting section. I'm happy with this. The next part of this project will be creating the materials and coming up with a color scheme. Okay, so the very first thing we need to do is we need to switch off the material override. So once I uncheck this, hit stop and hit render again, we'll see what we're dealing with. So at the moment, this scene doesn't really have much going on in terms of like aesthetics, and like it's all over the place. Like the wood here is different to the wood here. This black chair doesn't look great, and then we just have a white one here. So the color scheme I'm going to go with, and I suggest you pick one yourself. You can go whichever color you want, but go with 2 colors at the start and maybe add another one. But I'm just going to go for black and white. Keep it simple and get the basic concept down. So the very first thing we're actually going to look at is the flooring and how I generated the flooring and how you can create a really believable texture using the UV-WV randomizer. Okay, so let's jump straight into that. So the way I created the floor was I first of all created a spline, and then I used the floor generator node, which I'm sure you've seen plenty for if you've ever seen people create interior design. It's great for generating quick floors and tiles. And I used the herringbone because I like the shape of it, and these are the settings I used, and you can copy them for your own design. But the big thing is how to create a believable texture. So I've just broken down this material just to the diffuse to keep it simple. But one thing you see is Floor Generator creates pretty good UVs, but not exactly what I want. So with this texture, we're going to now use a triplanar. So if I go to my favorites and go to V-Ray triplanar text, that's going to create nice UVs straight away. based on these settings. Default are fine, and you can see though the texture is going across the entire object. It doesn't recognize these as separate elements. But that's when another great node by Vray comes in, Vray favorites, and go to UVW randomizer. Once I click that, nothing's going to change still, so don't worry, we just have to change a few settings. So if I click this, I know the texture is 1.2 by 1.2, and I want to put the blur to 0, and this is where the magic comes in. All we need to do is select by element, and that means it'll start texturing each element in its own space. So straight away we have a way more believable look, just with a few changes here. But some of the angles are a bit funny, like going like this and this, so I'm going to kind of limit it. And the way to do that is in the UV rotation here, I'm going to say I only want it to go for every 8 steps. So that'll be around every 45 degrees. So after that, you can see we get better looks. Like we have this straight, this up. We still have some at an angle, but I'm okay with that because we won't really see it. But yeah, that's pretty much how you can create a floor texture in a matter of a minute maybe, and it's very believable. Now, in terms of the other maps, you just need to click this into the other mapping source. So then I click this, drag it back into the bump, and then drag this back into the reflection. And then we have our wood texture, just like that. So let's jump on to the next thing, which I think I'm going to do the wooden shelves. So we have 2 shelves at the moment. This one and this one. I'm going to start with this one. And what I want to do with my theme is keep them black and white. So I'm going to make some of these black and some of them white. At the moment, this is what the material comes with. I'm first of all going to add in a blank one here, 9, so we can create another material for that black texture. Now for anything you're changing the color, the best node to use is if you hit right click, go to maps, go to general, and you can hit color correction. That's the one you want to use most times. And now I'm going to plug this in. So once I plug this in into here, I'll make this a bit bigger so you can see it. I'm going to plug this into our diffuse. Once you get the color correction, you want to switch this to advanced and change the gamma is usually the easiest and quickest. So if I want this to be very dark, I'm going to go lower. So something like 0.25. And you can see that gets darker, and it does a pretty good job in doing that. I might even go lower. I'm going to go 0.2. And then if I hit render again, you're going to see that entire piece is dark. But now we need to change the other ones. So I'm going to hit stop. I'm going to duplicate this material. And I'm going to plug this into 9. Then once I select the color correction, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to put this to around 8. So really make that white wooden texture. But if I hit render, we'll see if it works. It doesn't because we haven't assigned number 9 to anything. So what do I mean by that? I'm going to exit these. I'm going to go to my shelf. I'll isolate it. And what I want to do is I want to select the element. And you can see I have these already selected. And I'm going to set down here the ID to 9. And once I do that, you're going to see those change straight away. So now if we go back to this, I can hit render. And we get exactly that look we want. So let's do the same to the other shelf on the left hand side. Okay, now with the shelf on the left, we have IDs and this is the material, and I've copied the wooden texture that we did for the other shelf. So this is the dark one and this is the white one. So you can see here we have a white here. We're going to replace that with our white here. Plug it in here and say 2. That's going to change that. And then we have this, which we want to change with this wood. Click and drag and put it into 1. So then we have those swapped in, and I'm happy enough with that. I don't want too much blackness going on, too much. I think white looks a bit better, so that's perfectly fine. So we've got the 2 shelves done. The next thing to do now is this chair. So the next thing to do is the chair, and I'm going to change this very, very black material to a white kind of leather feel. And what I have is I have this plugin called Material Texture Loader 1.4, which lets you load in all your textures, and it knows by name which to load it in. So once I select all these, it knows which ones to put it in. It's a great plugin. I recommend buying it. And I'm going to switch this to real world. That's how I work. I'm going to switch this to 0.5 because I know the texture needs to be like that size. And then other than that, we just hit create material. And I'm going to call this, let's call it leather. Click OK. And then what we can do is we can hit slate, but it loads in the very first one. So what I need to do is select this new material created and go move to chair. So it's in here now. So you can do this. First thing I'm going to do is hit H to hide a bunch and then C to organize it. And then all we need to do, if I hit render now, it's loaded in there. We have it already set up just like we did with the shells. We have our elements set up, so I can click and drag this and I can tell it to go into 1 and we have our texture. So let me zoom in and see what this texture is actually like. And you can see we get this fabric going on. So if I was to select this and go to view image, this is the texture we have. It's being driven in there and it looks really nice. So we've done the chair, we've done the shelves here, The very last thing now we need to do is the couch. So with the couch, we have the same thing in multi-sub object. We have some for the legs of the chairs, this wood. We have the bottom here divided up and we have the top divided up. So we're going to do the same thing we've done before, which is I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a color correction node. And we're going to plug this diffuse in here and we plug this in here. Once I select this, I can go to my advanced and we can push this to, let's say 4, and that's going to make it a lot brighter and wider at the top. Then I can duplicate this, give it a second, plug this in here and plug this into our diffuse. So that's just the other material we're using, except I want the opposite. So I want something along the lines of 0.15 about that, and we get this dark color. So we get that high contrast. And now if I render it again, you can see we have a bit more of a theme going on. We have the black lampshade, we have black here, we have white and black. So it's something more believable and a bit more aesthetically pleasing now. So one thing we can do is, if you ever want to add in some design on like some type of wallpaper, some type of design onto the wall, what I'm going to use is a Vray Decal. So if I go to Vray and I hit Vray Decal, I can go into the front view, or in this case the left view, and I'm going to click and drag something along here. Okay, so then I'm going to make sure that it's penetrating into the wall, so around here, and then I'm going to add in a material. So I'm going to click here and I have my material and I'm going to choose a Vray bitmap. Once I click that, I'm going to locate my file, which I've made earlier. So maps, I have this. So I have both these. So I have the diffuse and I have also the the opacity. So click here, I have this. So I'm going to plug this into the opacity and we have both. So now what does that do? So if I go into my render, you'll see that now that imprints onto the wall. But let's obviously make it a bit better. So with the Vray Decal, I can move and stretch this and go into the settings. I'm going to make it fit the aspect ratio to material. And then I'm just going to start scaling this down a bit. Sorry, in the right axis. It'd be easier to do this in this view. So I'm going to start scaling this down until something like this, and start moving this down and up until we get the look I'm looking for. So something like that, yeah, something down low or wherever you like it. You can do different decals and you can have different pieces of art sticking on that wall and you get slightly different vibe. You can also put it onto materials, you can put it onto the couch, you put it on here, wherever you feel like. So we're pretty much done now with the materials. The next stage now is I'll give you some render settings, how you should render out, what format, and then once we have the format and everything we need, we can go into Photoshop and add even more believability to our scene. All right, I'll see you then. So now we're pretty much near the end of working in 3ds Max, and what we're going to do now is we're going to add in some maybe last lens effects if you want, and go through a few things about render settings and then exporting out. So the very first thing is when we're in here, you can make your final adjustments. If you want, you can go to the white balance and feel like, oh, actually it looks a bit too orange. We can go back to like 7500 and we get a bit more blue in there. Or you can go into the exposure and feel like actually we need a bit more exposure inside. I don't want to change that, but you can do that. The next thing though you can do is you can do lens effects, and if you click enable lens effects, in this scene you mightn't see it too much because we don't have any hot spots, I guess. We only have a few and we don't have any lights in our scene really. You could do it here, but if you want to see the effect, you can look down in this right corner. So if I switch this on and off, you're going to see a very subtle effect. So if I bring the intensity way up and I switch it on and off, you can see you can get that kind of light bloom. It's up to you if you want that. You'd probably see the effect here as well. You see you getting the outside light, giving that kind of bloom effect. I wouldn't have that intensity up. We'll keep it on, and I'm going to have it as a Create Effects results channel, so it'll be a separate thing anyway, so we can decide to use it or not. Then the other thing we can do is you can add in more if you want, but again, I don't usually do this because I like to work in Photoshop. But you have a bit more control in here if you feel like you need to. So that's pretty much it. Now I'm just going to run through the render settings and how we can export this. Now, one thing you can do is if I click this aspect ratio, if you ever find like your images aren't kind of quality, the thing that really improves it is resolution. You can go through the settings in V-Ray and change the noise and subdivisions, but one thing that really improves is resolution. However, it does increase your render time by a good bit. So if you wanted, you could increase this. Just keep going because it's the same aspect ratio, and we can go to, let's go 2000. And that'll get us a better result. So now when you want to output your footage, if you want to call it that, your scene, you want to go to V-Ray frame buffer and you want to click your separate render elements. Keep these checked and locate where you want to put your scenes. So I'm going to put it in here and I'm going to say, let's go scene. Then we go max scene. And then we're going to choose a format. It doesn't really matter. You can go for TIFF because then you can go for 16-bit or higher bit. Even PNG or JPEG are fine. It's really what you want out of it. I'm going to go for TIFF. And once I hit save, you're going to have a few more options. You can go 8-bit or 16-bit. We'll go 16-bit. It's up to you. You get just a bit more quality. You could do compression, but for now I'm not going to. Once you hit OK, we're going to go down. We're going to minimize the frame buffer and we want to go here. And we want to select bucket. And by default, it's set like this, which is fine. It will take a while. I'm going to increase this to 2 though. If you keep it at 2, it's good for thin materials. If you have a lot of foliage in your scene, you want to keep it at 2. You don't want to have it at 1. And I usually bring this down to 0.005. You could do 0.001, but don't go any lower than that. There's no need. And then in the render elements, you want to add a few things. One is the V-Ray denoiser. I like using the Intel Open Image denoiser. I like it, the results it gives. The new NVIDIA AI denoiser is pretty good, but I think it's very strong. You have the NVIDIA AI upscale now, which is a new feature, which you can go from like, you do 500 by 500 pixel and it'll double the scale using AI. You can try it out. I didn't get fantastic results, but it's improving every day. So I'm going to use Intel Open. And then I'm going to add in a few more. So I like the AO. It's ambient occlusion. We're going to add in back to beauty, and we go down to the bottom. We're going to add in our Z depth, and we can do wire color and render ID, and click OK. Now the Z depth, I know in our min we want to keep 0. We don't want 500 meters. That's way too much. I'm going to go something like 15 meters. If you want to find out exactly, we can go to our top view. We can select the camera and hit F3. You can go into this target distance. So if I go to, let's go click focus distance for a moment. I'm going to start scrolling this down until it reaches here. So you can see it's actually only about, let's go like 8 meters. So I'm going to check that and we found the distance. So let's just go 8 meters for that. Then we can go up to render ID, that's fine. AO we want to change. I usually keep this quite low to like 0.5, you can do even less, and we want to increase the subdivisions to something like 16. Other than that, that's fine the way it is for me and my purposes, and that's pretty much it. You can add denoise to these, and why not? It creates a bit of better result. I can add denoise to Z depth, and that's pretty much it. That's all you need to know. Then we can hit out render and get our scenes and images into Photoshop. Okay, now we're in the final phase, the post-production phase, where we can add in our images all into one. So what you want to do is go to load files into stack, browse for your images. I have them all here, and click OK. And then just click OK, and they're all going to be stacked in on top of each other. Okay, now they're all loaded in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start organizing them. So first of all, I'm just going to make one group, and I'm going to call them render elements. Okay, and then I'm just going to hide that group. I'll go away Photoshop. So this is our final image, and this is the one we're going to be working with. As you can see, it might be a bit different than the one I brought the decal around here, and I also put the same decal on top of the pillow. That's the only changes. Now, the very first thing I always do is I bring this AO on top, and I also put my render ID on top, put it in red, just so I have selection, but I always make sure it's invisible. Now, the AO, sometimes it can be too strong in the settings. I usually just do general ones. But what you want to do is you want to set this to multiply. So in the AO, you can see that it's pretty strong in some sections, too strong. So a lot of times I put a mask on my render elements and I invert them, Control I, and then they're just not in anywhere. And then I decide using a soft brush, let's just use a soft round brush, and I just start painting in where I want. So in white, so if I start painting here, just to show you the effect, you see it comes back in. And I start painting in areas that I think I want. So if I disable this, it's like, where do I want it? So let's put it back in this in here. Okay, that's good. And it's obviously way too strong. We're gonna put it in here. And maybe just in here a bit, make this shadow a bit darker. And in here. We can go like a small bit by the legs, maybe just underneath here as well. Small a bit there, maybe just maybe in here, and maybe just underneath here. Now it's obviously way too strong. So what we need to do then is need to change the opacity and bring it down to something extremely low, maybe 20%. And then we just have a subtle effect. You can see mostly by the pillow around here, we have a subtle effect of those little shadows. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add a bit more life to this ground and a bit more life to anything we want. I'm going to show you how you do that. Usually with the ID, you want to get your wand tool and you want to select. So what it's doing there, it's selecting this blue, which is that floor. So what I can do now is decide this. I can go on top and I can say, let's say I want a levels. And that means I want to increase the contrast. So we get a bit of a darker look, a darker sheen. And look how different that changes the whole environment. And we can do this with many other things. Say, this bowl. So we want to go into our render ID. I want to select this bowl and we want to add, say, a hue and saturation. And we say it's a bit too much, like I want to kill that color a bit. Or you can go into the colors and you say, oh, the reds are a bit strong, so I want to, you know, brighten them like that, or bring them down with darkness level. And that way you get a bit, the eye doesn't catch it as much and you're looking a bit more over here. Same with, say, this book here. Like, we don't have an ID exactly for it. We have this. But since it's a small selection, we can then just use the lasso. And what I'm going to do actually is deselect. Select here. Just something rough for the beginning. Something like that. And then we have this. Again, we can use the hue and saturation. And we can just kill this a bit so it's not so much in our scene. So it looks a bit better. So it's not this bright green distracting the eye. It's just very subtle. So one thing I like doing is I like adding in a curves. And straight away when I have this curves, I add it in here, here, and here to affect the midtones, the highlights, and the shadows. So I like to do this up and down until a bit further down. Then I move it left and right. Just figure out what's worked and what doesn't. So up there, then again, down and up. I think left and right, not much to change there. And it's very subtle, but it adds in what you want. So you can already see just from these, if I switch them all off, we're getting big changes and allowing us to do great things after 3ds Max. There's a great thing you can add to bring in contrast and sharpness to your scene. If I hit Control, Shift, Alt, and E, it's going to merge all my files, everything down below, into one layer. Then what I can do is I can go Control J, and I'm going to go to Filter, Other, High Pass. And what we were looking for here is to try and get some sharpness and some details out. And then I can click OK. And then we're going to switch this to overlay. Now, if I zoom in somewhere, let's go here by the flooring, I can switch this on and off and you can see that detail. This brings that sharpness. I find it does a better job than going to filter and sharpen and unsharpen mark. So you can still do those things, but I find this does everything I need. And if you find it's too strong in some areas, you can add a mask in. So like I think it did something here. It's adding in a bit of sharpness here. So what you can do is add a mask in, paint in black, and we can just remove it from here. But you can see that quickly with this one layer, we've automatically got that sharpness and that crispness to our scene. Control Shift Alt E to create, again, merge layer. I like to go to Control Shift and A, and that opens up Camera Raw. And yes, that's usually used for raw format, but it still gives us a lot of controls. So in Camera Raw, we have features like the basic ones, so I can increase the exposure and decrease it. Again, you're going to be quite limited because it's TIFF, but we save that on 16 bits, so we still have a good bit of control. Then we can add in contrast if you want to add a bit more in. It's getting a bit too strong, like down here it's very, very dark, but honestly it's up to you what you like. Now you can continuously change the shadows, you can change the blacks, we can add in a bit more texture. So if we zoom in here, you can probably see that happening. So you can see this bit of the couch is getting a lot more texture. Now you should be subtle with these and not do too much, but there's also things like, if we go to detail, you can add in sharpening as well from here. You can do a lot. So I think this is a great feature if you just want to jump in and change some things. And then you get a really powerful scene from just a few sliders. Then if I click OK, if I'm happy with that, we have our scene and we get just a bit more detail. So now the next thing I like to do is, if I go into filter, lens correction, and you go into custom. Okay, so we zoomed in here, and if I start bringing this up a lot, bringing all the fringes up, you can kind of see what's going on here. So if I go to, let's say, even more, and then a blue, and I switch this on and off, it's very subtle. Let's see, I might have to zoom in a bit more, but you'll see like a little fringe here and a little fringe here, and if I turn the preview on and off, you'll see that disappear. So this adds in just that little bit of like camera error, which like gives it a bit more believability when people look at it. Make the question like, oh, is that a 3D render or is that an actual photo? The last thing you can do is you can actually add in a vignette in the negative. We'll start to get that vignette. Now you need to be subtle about this, but again, you could bring this up and down to something that you want. You can bring it up to lighten it up, and you get that slight shadowing to focus the eye in. Again, that's a lens error usually photographers don't want, but for us it kind of adds in that believability. And once I hit OK, that's our scene, and that's our image in post-production. Again, it's up to you what you want to do. The very last thing you could do if you wanted to have different looks. So you got that shot and it's like, oh, I kind of want, the Instagram filter. What you can do is you can go into color lookup, and I'm going to just select the very first one, and you can start changing this. As you can see, if I press down, these are going to start changing. I'm just going to hit down, and you get different looks for each one you want. So you can go up and up and down. And the great thing about Photoshop is like, oh, here you have this look. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it down, make it not as strong. And just like that, you have a totally different look and feel. So those are the final things. And again, you don't need to go too deep in Photoshop. Yes, you could go into all these render elements that I left over, and you could use them again. You could increase the Vray lighting, you can increase the reflection. But in the end of the day, if you're happy with the results you're looking at, then you don't need to go much more. You just need to add in a few filters, a few adjustments, and you'll get a great image. So I'll be hoping to do more of these videos in the future, and I hope you like them.